So what I'm going to tell you about today is the case for a Green New Deal. And I'm going to figure out how to click. How do I do that? Is there a clicker? I just push forward? Play. Okay. So the place where the Green New Deal lives right now is very much in the Democratic primary. You may have noticed, I've certainly noticed, I've started a bizarre side gig of analyzing all the candidates' plans. And yes, I need to go back to my day job, I think. So this is the 2050 plan for electricity. That is Joe Biden's plan for how we're going to decarbonize our electricity system. And what we've done here, what I've done here is zoomed in on the past 2 decades. And you can think of the black line as the benchmark for where we need to be at any given time. So if we take a straight line between the year 2000 and run it out to 2050, where we have to have 100% clean electricity, that means we have to grow by 2 percentage points every single year. And if we just zoom in on the history, you can see that we've been beating that line for the past 18 years, up to 2018. But if you zoom into the future, what you'll see is that that line gets a lot harder to meet. And this is, of course, the Biden plan, which is not the most ambitious. And that's because we've really been living on borrowed time in terms of our nuclear fleet, as well as the hydropower resources that Nick mentioned this morning. We don't really have more of those to develop in the United States. So what we need to be doing is dramatically ramping up the green area, the renewables, and it's at a pace and scale that's really unprecedented. Renewables have been growing at 0.6 percentage points annually. That's it for the past decade. And so if we're talking about 2 percentage points, we are way off where we need to be being, even for the Biden plan. Okay, so let's now look at the 2035 plan, which is the Inslee or Warren plan, as she adopted Inslee's plan after he exited the race. And that basically says we're going to keep nuclear online, we're going to use our existing hydro, and we're going to add renewables, and we're going to do it pretty darn quickly out to 2035. So what you can see here is that the growth rate in renewables is really quite dramatic compared to historical levels. And then this is the Sanders plan, which is the 2030 100% renewable plan for electricity. And what I've done here is just deleted the nuclear fleet, because that's the plan. And you can see it gets a lot harder. So journalists, they love to call me up and say, Leah, I mean, all of these candidates, they agree, like they're all on the same page. And I'm like, you have no idea what one sentence in a plan means. It means something very different to the world when you adopt one version of a plan versus another. And I think that those facts are lost on the vast majority of people, that every year matters, every resource matters. The words on paper, if they were implemented in the world, would be dramatically different. But of course, as Jesse Jenkins, who's in the room, would love to tell me, and it's true, that's not the whole story. Because the Warren and Sanders plans are not just about decarbonizing our electricity system, they're also about decarbonizing our transportation system, which is currently the largest source of emissions, just by like a little bit compared to the power sector right now. So it's actually harder than that. What I've done here is just stretch the line out to 200%, because basically what we have to do is not rebuild our entire grid that we took 120 years to build once over the next 15 years or 10 years. We need to do it twice. And that's because if you want to put the transportation sector onto the grid, you have to build more of the grid, because it turns out it takes energy to drive cars around. So these are really monumental plans. They are obviously essential if we want to preserve life. And I like to say that the US electricity system decarbonizing is the first linchpin globally for the pathway to a low carbon future for the entire planet. Many people think this is the easy thing to do. It's not. Decarbonizing the electricity system is not the easy thing to do, but it's the first thing we have to do. And if we can get this done right in the United States, we have a shot at doing it around the world. And to me, the difference between these two plans is sort of like saying, I'd like to walk out my front door tomorrow and go hiking in the Sierras for the next 4 weeks. That would be really hard. And then the other one is saying, I'd like to walk out my front door tomorrow and go scale Mount Everest tomorrow. So they're both really difficult, but they are different scales and scopes in terms of where we're going and how fast. Now, I have a slide which says, a carbon tax alone will not do this. I have just spent my summer writing a long essay for the Boston Review, which will argue this. I will be banned from all conferences with economists in the future, so pray for me. I'm not against carbon prices, but if that's the scale and scope and what we're talking about, a carbon tax will not do that. You cannot get it high enough, first of all, from a political economy perspective. The World Bank says you need carbon prices between $40 to $80 a ton to be consistent with Paris. Most carbon taxes around the world are like $15 a ton. So, and anyway, let's say we were to get it to 200. Carbon prices are not very good at forcing new technology into the market. So that brings us to the beautiful words of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is that we must have solutions at the scale of the crisis. It is not enough to put a Band-Aid on an open artery. You will still bleed out, you know? You have to actually solve the problem. So that is what the Green New Deal is about. So what is the Green New Deal about? And of course we have the resolution, we have work of groups like Data for Progress and New Consensus fleshing out these ideas. And what it is in practice is a whole bunch of things that actually would bring electricity into the market that's clean. And this is also fleshed out in Sanders' plan and Warren and Inslee and Joe Biden's as well. So first of all, we need a national clean electricity standard. The closest we've ever come to that is during the Waxman-Markey bill. There was actually a clean electricity standard there that would have made a difference had it been implemented and passed. We did not do that, obviously, 10 years ago. We also need to have clean vehicle standards. And this is the kind of stuff that the Inslee plan talks about in detail. Now, what you should be thinking when you look at those terrifying lines that go up at very dramatic angles is energy efficiency. Because for every kilowatt hour that we do not need, the line gets less steep. So if we can make our homes more energy efficient, if we cannot use energy in the first place, then we don't need to decarbonize it, right? So that's a really important lever. Now, under the Recovery Act, there was a program called the 1603 program, which deployed renewables pretty darn quickly. And right now, what we have is called the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And I don't know if there's nerds in the room who realize, but those things are going away. They are sunsetting right now. So our main federal supports for renewables are slated to expire. And of course, the vehicle tax incentives, too, for certain manufacturers who have gone above their limits are also slated to expire. So the golden era of support for these things is coming to an end, and it was hardly a golden era to begin with. The other thing we need is research and development funds, perhaps not for everything, but for at least a few things. One is long-term storage. If we want to have very high penetrations of renewables, we have to have a way to deal with it when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. And I think Nick this morning did a great job talking about using, for example, pumped hydro at reclaimed mining sites. That was an interesting idea. And also R&D. The Sanders plan, for example, talks about sort of a sunshot style initiative, but for batteries. And something we do not talk enough about in our community, but that I feel very strongly about, is negative emissions technologies. We have 415 parts per million in the atmosphere this year of carbon. We need to get that carbon out of the air. Okay? It came from an underground reservoir of fossil fuels. It needs to go back underground. That is not a justification to continue to burn fossil fuels, but it is a solution to take the carbon out of the air and the oceans, which is something that I feel is very important to do. Another thing we don't talk very much about is what the hell are we going to do with all the carbon-intensive infrastructure we've built? We're going to have to pay people off? We're going to put them in jail? I don't know what we're doing, but my point is, I wasn't saying we're putting them in jail. I'm just saying we got to do something, right? Okay. So guess what, guys? That very intense talk I just gave you was 57% of the problem. Shit. It was pretty hard, and it was only half of the problem. So then we come to these other sectors that we don't spend as much time talking about, and they're the other half. So just quickly, I'll go through the other half of the problem. Buildings. The Inslee and now Warren plan talks about retrofitting 4% of every building in America every year for 25 years. Wow, that's an interesting number. Also doing new builds up to standards. We, of course, have to decarbonize industry. That means we have to get steel off of coal. We have to think about how cement could become, for example, a negative emissions technology rather than a source of carbon as it is today. We have to think about aluminum and plastics. In the agricultural industry, fertilizer, guess what it's made of, guys? Fossil fuels. So got to think about that. And the thing that the right always loves to go on about, the cows. But turns out you could maybe feed them seaweed and they reduce their methane emissions. So, and there's also like lab meat. So there are other solutions other than taking away your burgers, hypothetically. We need to phase out the oil and gas industry, really important. And that's not going to be easy, but that is a really important fight. So, oh my God, it's already so hard. Why the hell would we do social policy and economic policy on top of that? That was a question this morning on the panel, and everybody didn't answer it. Well, no, I didn't mean that as anyway. So I will answer it now. Well, the concept of the Green New Deal is that we have a twin crisis of the climate crisis and economic inequality in this country, and that these two crises are fundamentally linked. That is the idea. And if you think about the way carbon taxes have been greeted by populations in France or Australia, or we'll see what happens in Canada with the election in a few weeks, you know, it's been really hard for people who are struggling to pay their bills because they're not paid living wages to think about paying even more at the pump for their daily lives, basically. And so we have to think about bringing people along across racial lines, gender lines, class lines. And of course, if we're going to do these crazy things I'm talking about, that will involve massive economic disruption. That's just a fact. And so we have to think about how we're going to bring people along with a just transition, with health care, et cetera. And I have a paper with Matto Mildenberger and Parrish Bergquist, which we are trying to get published right now, which shows empirically, using a conjoint experiment, that it is more popular as well to link, for example, a $15 minimum wage, health insurance, affordable housing with whatever your favorite climate policy is. So it's real. It does work. So why jobs? Well, I have another paper I've already published which shows that people really like jobs. I mean, wow, that was a great finding. But I got it published in a good journal. So it's going to create a lot of jobs, guys. And I think that some of the messaging, like Elizabeth Warren has been pretty great about this, talking about the economic opportunity. And I think that creating a sense of hope, and guys, we're going to have to do a lot of stuff that will have work for people. And of course, it's more popular. So I will leave you with this quote, which really puts the context in a broader historical position, which is, this is Thomas Edison speaking a century ago, and he says, "Why we have just begun to commence to get ready to find out about electricity. This scheme of combustion to get power makes me sick to think about it. It is so wasteful. You see, we should use natural forces and thus get all of our power. Sunshine is a form of energy, and the winds and the tides are manifestations of energy. Do we use them? Oh no. We burn up wood and coal as renters burn up the front fence for fuel. We live like squatters, not as if we owned the property." So we are in a century-long fight. We have already wasted 4 decades. That is why the slope is so terrifying in terms of what we have to do so quickly. The fossil fuel denial campaign, which is alive and well, has been very effective at delaying, and we cannot delay anymore. We have to end the fossil fuel era. There's no more time to waste. I will leave you with this, which is I have a book coming out in March that is super wonky if you're interested in this wonky stuff. And you can always follow my ramblings on Twitter as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you will be in this fight with the rest of us.